Hello and welcome to GameSpot's Play for All. We are covering so many of the latest and greatest games, and we have a special segment here today because we're talking about Borderlands 3's DLC 3, which is called Bounty of Blood. And I'm joined by Matt Cox, the creative director for the DLC. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. So many Borderlands fans probably got a peek of Bounty of Blood by the Borderlands show, or maybe some of the gameplay videos. There's some information out there, but for those who may not be caught up with what this DLC offers, can you give sort of a foundation for what Bounty of Blood is offering?
Absolutely. Bounty of Blood is a story of revenge. The Vault Hunters arrive on a brutal frontier planet called Gehenna in the hopes of collecting the sheriff's bounty on this gang known as the Devil Riders. Now, the Devil Riders are a very violent gang of beast-riding mercenaries, and you're going to team up with the locals to save the town of Vestige. Now, the Vault Hunters is going to take the fight straight to the Devil Riders using new gameplay objects that we've added to Bounty of Blood, also including a new Jetbeast vehicle in a tale that is told by an unseen narrator.
Yes, so I think the first thing I want to get out of the way is talking about the Jetbeast, because that's the first thing that stood out to me in the gameplay videos. I think it's the first time you've added vehicles since the base game, if I recall correctly. But
yeah,
tell me about the jet.
The Jetbeast is kind of a half jet bike, half creature. Really, it's like you have the dinosaur like saurian head mounted on the front of basically a hover jet bike. And to me, very early on, when we were trying to figure out, like when we're making a Western focused DLC, it's like you can't have a Western without a horse, right? And so we decided for the players, it's going to be something cooler than a horse. It'll actually be a hover bike with some cool weaponry and different heads that you can mount on the front. And so when you're riding in the frontier, it's called the Blast Plains. Our big zone map is called the Blast Plains. You get to do some really cool Jetbeast combat. Personally, I'm a fan of vehicle combat, and we love the Borderlands loop. The Borderlands loop, combat loop, is tried and tested. Not only do players get to use the Jetbeast and all these cool weapons, but the Devil Riders are riding experimented on saurians. So they're literally on the backs of creatures fighting while you have this amazing Jetbeast. So there is a much more focused vehicle combat dynamic as you're trying to travel from point A to point B, just getting to the new mission or a new side mission as you're traveling through the Blast Plains.
And part of that plays into Borderlands' style of humor. Now, some folks may have certain feelings about the way Borderlands has used humor throughout its history, but for this DLC, I know that it's a story about revenge and it has a narrator in there, so it almost gives off this vibe of something that's a little bit more serious. But how do you, one, channel in Borderlands' style of humor, but also how do you keep that fresh if that's what you're trying to do?
Man, I feel like you were actually in on some of our earlier conversations when we were trying to figure out what this DLC is, because that's actually a conversation that we had very early on. We did want to take, with the main plot, a little bit more of a serious tone, a little more measured tone. Quieter may not be the right word, because we do have a narrator that is that does talk about what we are doing and gives more flavor to the story without actual character dialogue having to happen. Now, that being said, we have a lot of new characters in this DLC, and it's a simple story overall. Like, it is a revenge, like seek revenge on the Devil Riders, but having that focused of a plot allows the characters that we build around it a lot more room to breathe and us to get attached to them. So yeah, what you said is very much true. We did try to get a little bit more of a serious tone with the main story of Bounty of Blood, but it's Borderlands, so we still look for all of those opportunities for the traditional Borderlands humor. Then you'll see a lot more of that in the side missions, but on the main plot, I think people are in for something pretty unique and fresh for Borderlands.
You mentioned earlier that, you and the team are very focused on this DLC. A lot of things that happen around the edges for Borderlands 3 is kind of not really what you're focused on, because you're trying to work on the DLC. So how much creative freedom do you have in kind of making this your own sort of thing, while also accounting for how Borderlands 3 has been shifting through its lifespan?
DLCs are one of our favorite places at Gearbox to experiment and push boundaries of what people expect from Borderlands. Not so much where you can't recognize that it's a Borderlands game. Of course, you still have the Schluter loop, right? But no, we do have some freedom to try some new things. With certain story moments, and we're keeping a lot of the story close to the chest, because we built something we think is pretty special, some surprises here and there. And I just want to say this, when I say surprises, I know a lot of people think, returning characters are coming back, who is it? But I just want to be very clear that the only returning characters are the Vault Hunters themselves. The planet of Gehenna and all the characters we meet are all brand new. But we were able to do experiment on some new types of spectacles and stuff that maybe we haven't had the chance to do in Borderlands in a very long time.
That's funny you mentioned that, because my next question that I actually have on my notes doc right here is talking about how Mad Moxie's Heist and both Love Guns and Tacticals kind of reincorporated some older Borderlands characters. But now you have, like you said, the only returning characters are actually the Vault Hunters. What kind of, does that present any different types of challenges? Because I mean, not to say that previous DLCs didn't put in the work for that, but I think that it's an easy way for players to be like, oh yes, I remember that thing and I'm attached to that. But now you're kind of working with a clean slate. That must be much harder, I assume.
I think there's definitely an extra challenge when you can't assume that the player already has built-in emotion on previous characters coming right into a new DLC. So we definitely recognize that as a challenge. But another thing that I think is an amazing strength of the Borderlands universe is that you do have DLCs in previous Borderlands that did introduce brand new characters that are now beloved. So we wanted to make sure that the characters that we introduce are built in a way that people can get attached to them in that short span of time of a DLC campaign, right? Since we don't have the luxury of counting on people's emotional attachment to previous characters now. And we recognize that people love that some of our DLCs do bring back returning characters, but there is a part of the community that looks for a fresh story as well. And so I think I'm very proud of our entire team and how we came together to build new characters around the Bounty of Blood plot.
Cool, yeah, and Gehenna is going to be an all new place, a new planet, that you kind of have to build out as well. But one thing that stood out to me is the town of Vestige. And I think there's, I've been talking with some folks, and it seems like maybe your actions are going to have consequences that are reflected in Vestige. Can you dig a little bit more into that?
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted the player to feel not only like when you beat the story, it's like, I beat the game, right? But we wanted to build some subtle and maybe sometimes not so subtle changes in the town that happened because of the actions that the player has taken during their missions. So there's a prisoner that you can free, and if you free the prisoner, it comes back to the saloon and starts singing a song about the main plot, essentially. So all of the actions that the player takes, you go back to the saloon and he's updated his song, basically singing about what you did. So it's kind of like previously on Bounty of Blood, but not that straight up. But you go and listen to a song, it's like, wait a minute, I just did that. He's singing about me. And then there are NPCs that you could meet in some side missions, and you could make a specific choice in that side mission, come back to town, and they will be doing one thing if you chose A, let's say, and they'll be doing another thing if you chose B. So if you complete the entirety of Bounty of Blood, story missions, side missions, and challenges, and you go back to the town of Vestige, you will be able to not just subtly perceive, but see the results of your actions.
This being Borderlands, the core loop of being a Schluter, as they say, is all about the looting and the shooting. So with Bounty of Blood, Borderlands 3 kind of nailed that loop. Almost in a way that makes you look at it and be like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But you still want to offer something new as opposed to what previous DLC and what the base game did. So with Bounty of Blood, how are you kind of shifting around or rethinking combat encounters, enemy types, and the locations, like the combat arenas that you find them in, some of the mechanics of weapons. Can you tell me a little bit about that whole mix of things to make this feel a little more fresh?
Yeah, you said it. We're very proud of Borderlands' time-tested loop, and we love our gunplay and we love our core loop, and we made a lot of additions to that in just the main game in Borderlands 3 with sliding and mantling and all of that stuff. But I think our approach for Bounty of Blood with these new gameplay objects, we added 4 new objects to the mix. So just think of them as additive ingredients to the already strong combat loop. So there's something called a tailorweed, where if you shoot it, it releases these bugs that turn enemies to your side for 8 to 9 seconds. So you can basically turn enemies to your side for a time. There's a coresploder, and core is this mineral that everybody on Gehenna that's what they're mining for, is the literal core element. And a coresploder, if you melee it, it will shotgun out high damage shrapnel. There's also a breezer, which acts sort of like a jump pad, but it soars you into the air by a puff of air. And then there's a telezapper, which is essentially a teleporter, being able to travel, lets the player travel from point A to point B instantaneously. So we wanted to take 4 gameplay objects, and throw them into combat mix. So while we still have that core loop going on, we have different avenues of different styles of combat and ways to negotiate all the craziness in Borderlands.
Cool. Yeah, and I know there's probably going to be a ton of more loot, which is core to Borderlands, of course. Can you tell me about any special legendary weapons or legendary guns that we should be excited about?
So there is a side mission where you get to meet Soapy Steve, and if you complete that side mission, you will get something called the Bubble Blaster that shoots, wait for it, high damage soap bubbles. I mean, who doesn't want that in a Borderlands game? But yeah, there are also but there are more traditional legendaries that you can find as well. There's a Torg that also has gyro jets on sticky bombs that all stick to enemies as they pass through this wave. So there are a lot in there that I'm excited for people to discover and try out.
So I think this is my last deep question. I have a few short ones before we close this out. But in terms of, Borderlands 3 or Borderlands in general has had like this kind of this history of incorporating DLC packs in a very natural way. It gets like its player base excited, coming back for more. But over the past few years, we've seen games move to more service style types of games where it's continually updated every few months, or every month there's a new content, new patches. But it seems like Borderlands has a little mix of both, but leaning into that traditional style DLC. How do you and the team kind of account for the changing of the way games are, live games and ongoing games are served to its players?
Yeah, I know a lot of our design team at the outset of Borderlands 3, we're looking at what all the trends are as well. But I think at the end of the day, we wanted to stay true to what we knew the Borderlands loop is. And although, with our events and takedowns, like we chose to go with the traditional story campaign add-ons, because I think for right now, that really sits in with where our community is at and the types of games that we actually want to make. So yeah, you do see some influence there, but I think at the very end of the day, our Borderlands DLC is very much us, very much Borderlands.
Cool. All right. So how are players going to be able to access Bounty of Blood content? Do they have to make it to the end of the game? Is there a special level boost to get you right there? How's it going to work for those who may not be that far into the base game?
Yeah, if you are not as far as Sanctuary, I guess that might be a spoiler for people who aren't, Sanctuary 3, you will be able to start a brand new character at the level to access any DLCs. So DLC 1, 2, and Bounty of Blood, you'll be able to start those DLCs immediately by creating a new character that is at DLC level. I'll just say, going back to our characters, I'm very excited for people to meet Rose and Juno. Rose and Juno are our two main characters that anchor this entire story. Rose is our guide and our ally. She's the first person that we meet who helps us learn the brutal ways and helps us do some combat before we reach the town of Vestige. And her family has been on the planet for generations. And then eventually we'll meet Juno, who is a rough and tumble brawler. She has a very checkered past, and the town doesn't trust her at all. And so we get to follow her story of redemption, as well as she helps us take down the Devil Riders to try to earn back that respect from the town of Vestige. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things I want to get across, that we're excited for people to meet Rose and Juno. Oh, and also, man, our audio team did an amazing job with a very original soundtrack. We talk about pushing the boundaries of what types of combat and gameplay things you can do, but we can't leave out what our audio team did. And the soundtrack for Bounty of Blood is something I'm definitely looking forward to.
Ooh, those are two things that I love a lot about the games that I love is character development and banging soundtrack. So that is music to my ears, man. So Matt Cox, creative director for Bounty of Blood, the third DLC pack for Borderlands 3. Thank you so much for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Of course. And all you fine folks out there, thank you for tuning in, giving us your attention. We are also doing Play for All to raise funds for a couple different causes, Black Lives Matter and direct relief for COVID-19 relief. You can check description links below of this video. And yeah, thank you for watching. We have so much more content coming up, and I want you to stick around, and we'll see you there.